Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. It is just on time. We're going to give some more people a chance to also join. We had some more registrations, so let's wait maybe another minute or so. But welcome, everyone. I think we have people from various corners of the world, from various areas of the world. So for some of you, it might actually be quite late or in the middle of the night. So welcome for joining us to this for this webinar. So yeah, we have a good number of attendees now, I think. So let's start. My name is Christine Unterhitzenberger. I'm an associate editor of the International Journal of Project Management, and I am the facilitator or host of the webinar today. The topic of today's webinar is Project Stakeholder Engagement, as you can now also see on the screen. And it is a real pleasure that we also have the guest editors here today, Kirsty, Roya, and Francesco. And would you like to briefly introduce yourself, please?
Yes, thank you. My name is Kirsi Aaltonen, and I work as a professor of project management and complex systems at the University of Oulu. And much of my own research work has focused on stakeholder engagement in interorganizational projects. And I must say that it's a pleasure to have been able to be part of this wonderful process, whose outcome we actually see now today. And I'm really looking forward to the discussion today.
Thank you. Happy to be with you today. My name is Roya Darafshan. I am a lecturer in project management at Bartlett School of Sustainable Construction in University College London. And my research is mainly about marginalized stakeholders, the darker side of organizations and projects, and violence and resistance.
Hello, everyone. My name is Francesco Di Maddaloni, and I'm associate professor at UCL, so working with Roya. My research has shifted recently in the intersection between project management and public administration and public management. My main research has been on external stakeholder engagement, specifically on local communities. Now I'm looking more on the public sector, focusing on local governments. Very good to be here today.
Thank you very much. And you can also see a few more faces here on the screen. These are authors of some of the papers who were published in the special collection. So welcome Pernille, Ken, and Maud. And we had Nadir also just a moment ago. I just can't see him on my screen anymore. And they will present their papers in a moment when we get to that section. So what are we doing today? How is our webinar structured? I'm going to give a very brief introduction to IJPM and what the International Journal of Project Management is and what it aims to do. And then the guest editors are going to take over to provide a background. The authors of the papers will introduce their contributions. And then we will have a panel discussion and you have a chance to ask specific questions to the editors as well as to the authors at the end in the Q&A session. But please feel free to use the Q&A function here in the webinar throughout the presentation, and we will come to the questions then in the last section. So yeah, International Journal of Project Management. As I said, my name is Christine Unterhitzenberger. I'm an associate editor or one of the associate editors of IJPM. Our editor-in-chief is Martina Huemann. The journal was established in 1983, so it's now over 40 years old, and we publish 8 issues per year. We get about 800 submissions, and the desk rejection rate of 81% sounds really very high. But the reason for that is that most of these papers either don't fit to the journal, or they don't engage with the conversation of the journal, or they don't follow the standard and the guidelines that we expect in the journal. You can see the impact factor and site score here on the slide as well. In terms of the matrices, we are the leading journal in our field, and we are co-owned by Elsevier, the Association for Project Management in the UK, and the International Project Management Association. For updates, you probably already follow us on LinkedIn, but if you are interested in further kind of webinars or also here when papers are published, please do follow us on LinkedIn. You see our name also here on the slide. As I said, the papers which are desk rejected often don't fit to the journal. So what does it mean to fit to the journal? So IJPM is all about projects and their creation power. It is really a management journal. It is about how projects, programs, or portfolios are organized. It is also about the project-based organization, project networks, and the project-oriented society. So everything related to the project, program, or portfolio. With IJPM, we try to bridge organizational theory, organizational behavior, HR, leadership, and different disciplines to the field of projects and project management. And we really do welcome any context. A lot of the papers we get are from construction, which is very welcome, but we also are very cautious about diversifying the contexts within which research within which projects are conducted. So you can see here also urban development, IT, or change. Sometimes we also have agriculture. So we really welcome different sectors and contexts. And there is an editorial on celebrating the power of projects and their management, which really outlines the scope of the journal. And what we focus on is rigor and relevance. And together with Peter McKiernan, Martina and I have, at the end of last year, written an editorial on the principles of responsible research, which relate to how research is done and also why it is done and how it needs to contribute to society and have relevance to what practice is doing. IJPM publishes mainly empirical papers. So that's our main focus, qualitative or quantitative. Sometimes review or conceptual papers are published if they have a strong theoretical contribution. And then we have essays, which are typically on invitation, as well as research notes, and upcoming will be a new format of policy notes. So this is really just a very quick overview of the journal and the context within which this special collection was developed. And I will now hand over to Kirsty to present the special collection. Over to you.
Thank you, Christine. So I will start by briefly explaining the background and motivation for our special collection. So this collection in a way builds on a paradigm shift in the field from the kind of the traditional notion of stakeholder management to the more relational and dialogical idea of stakeholder engagement. And this shift also recognizes that stakeholders are not just managed, but engaged with and for in all kinds of collaborative processes of meaning making and value co-creation. And this paradigm shift also obviously presents new challenges for project organizations as they are trying to address and balance the needs and demands of diverse set of stakeholders. And in planning this special issue, we acknowledged several limitations that have constrained stakeholder research in project contexts. First, much of the literature takes an organization-centric perspective, where stakeholder perspectives and knowledge about their concerns and values and behaviors are in a way filtered through the voices of project managers or the project organization. And the actual voices of the stakeholders themselves are underrepresented. And second, most of the studies focus on dyadic relationships between the project and individual stakeholders, which in a way fails to account for the kind of the more complex networked nature of project stakeholder environments. And third, while stakeholder theory is often referenced, it remains under-theorized in project studies, and there's a real need for more theoretically grounded approaches. For example, such approaches that consider emotions, identity, and the kind of the social fabric underpinning stakeholder interactions. And then a bit about the aims of this special collection. So our aim in general was to broaden the discourse on stakeholder engagement in project studies. In other words, the aim was to advance theory related to the nature, aims, processes, and consequences of stakeholder engagement in temporary organizations, and to also offer room for more inclusive and also innovative views on stakeholder engagement. And rather than focusing on instrumental stakeholder management tools, we were inviting work that brings forward theoretical richness, methodological diversity, and inclusive approaches. And in our call for papers, we defined 6 core themes that guide the collection. So the concept and outcomes of project stakeholder engagement, optimizing stakeholder engagement, the network perspective and dynamics of project stakeholder engagement, challenges of multi-stakeholder engagement in projects, engaging institutions and communities, and then stakeholder engagement in rarely examined settings and new horizons. So in short, we wanted to shift our view from considering stakeholder engagement as merely one of many processes within projects to kind of emphasizing a relational perspective and seeing it as a continuous set of activities that are being shaped by the interactions of stakeholders and the broader society. And here you can see the contributions that we have in this special collection. So 6 articles were selected that in our view reflect that ambition and are listed over here. And they offer a very rich and diverse set of contributions and also really nicely address the different 6 themes that we outlined in the call for papers. And today we have authors from 3 papers over here present, and they will soon present their work so that you will learn even more about their contributions. I will just now briefly present the 6 papers. So first we have contributions from Florisel and Brunet that explore symbolism in mega projects, identifying how different types of symbolic meanings shape stakeholder attitudes and mobilization. Then we have the paper by Crow and Schulz, who use text mining and survey data to show actually how engaging skeptical stakeholders in urban innovation projects can actually enhance the innovativeness and implementation intention at the front end of projects. Then we have a paper by Lee et al., who take a networked view of stakeholder value creation in mega projects, highlighting different types of value flows and also showing how value creation shifts across the project life cycle. Then we have a paper by Narebashu et al., who study cooperative tensions, so the simultaneous dynamics of collaboration and competition within project ecologies, particularly in collaborative consumption setting. And then we have a paper by Pandey et al., which is focusing on beneficiary engagement in international development projects, showing actually that it has positive effects on both short and long-term project success. And finally, a paper by Zhang et al., who analyzed community engagement on social media, and their work highlights then the affordances, but also the limitations of using digital platforms to engage with stakeholders. And as you can see, the articles bring new insights and open up avenues for future scholarship in project stakeholder engagement also, which Roya and Francesco will now discuss further.
Yeah, thank you, Kirsi. So as Kirsi just mentioned, we identified some sort of limitations that we spotted in the literature of stakeholder engagement at the beginning when we launched the call, and then there were some aims. And based on those, in addition to the contributions we saw in the 6 papers that eventually were published in the special issue, and the general change that we saw in the social worlds, that's what is happening in the external world regarding stakeholder engagement, we identified 6 different avenues for potential research that we found could be interesting and intriguing to be explored further. So the first one is incorporating stakeholder voices. That is because what tends to be happening in the body of literature in broader management and organization studies, but also in project scholarship, is that there is an overemphasis on the organizational perspective. So researchers tend to go to managers, project managers, corporate organizations that basically have the role of engaging stakeholders and see so how they do that, what are the implications there. And rather we have an overlook on how stakeholders themselves perceive the aims, the processes, and the outcomes of the engagement efforts. And so in many cases, we see that the narrative is really shaped by those with the power to engage, while the voices of the less powerful stakeholders or those who need to be engaged is really underrepresented or even totally ignored. So our call here is that there is a need to center stakeholder voices. And so we need a more comprehensive and meaningful understanding of stakeholder engagement. In doing that, we need to incorporate the experience, expectations, the feedbacks and emotions of diverse range of stakeholders. But this approach is not only just to have an idea of how stakeholders perceive their engagement. This essentially would have theoretical and practical implications. So the first one is, for instance, if we think about the stakeholder engagement, it is we think about that it is a sort of very complex, dynamic, and very messy process. In the project lifecycle, it could be moments or periods in which stakeholders may become disengaged, may lose their interest, may choose to even remain silent about the project for a variety of reasons. We don't know, or we know very little about why this happens. If we go rather to the side of the stakeholders, this could unpack why all these dynamics are happening on the side of the stakeholders, and so somehow unpack what is happening on the darker sides of the stakeholder engagement. Next topic that we think that could be an interesting avenue for studying stakeholder engagement would be multi-stakeholder engagement in considering the grand challenges. So there is a growing recognition of the potential for multi-stakeholder engagement to contribute meaningfully to addressing some of the global issues such as climate change, social injustice, inequality, etc., etc. And we see that there could be very interesting avenues for exploring how diverse stakeholder groups can actually be actively engaged and involved in developing innovative and collaborative solutions for these complex challenges. But then here, in the interconnection of stakeholder engagement and grand challenges, it is not only about stakeholder engagement, it could be expand and be considered of, for instance, how governance of organizations, when there are diverse stakeholders from private, public sector involved, how, for instance, governance structure can be established in order to be able to engage all of the stakeholders to create innovative solutions for these challenges that we face in our contemporary societies. And the next topic that we think, again, would be interesting would be inclusion of marginalized stakeholders. So this, when we talk about marginalized stakeholders, we basically talk about groups, individuals, communities that are disempowered or impoverished, or maybe they actually have a very different from cultural, organizational perspective, different approach, understanding, interests into the project. And essentially, again, in the broader body of literature in management and organization studies, but also in project management scholarship, we historically haven't really considered these individuals much. But we think that when it comes to stakeholder engagement, we need not only innovative methodological approach to incorporate them and their voices into our research, but also several considerations should be considered about, so what if they are engaged in the project? So the tendency would be that there are stereotypes, there are labelings that could happen in this process, but innovative approach and methods could be used in order to identify the root causes of why they are being excluded or marginalized in the projects and organizational activities. And this approach would inform also more equitable and inclusive engagement strategies that empower these underrepresented voices. And in all these new avenues of research that we suggest, of course, we also call for some more diverse ways of studying these ideas that we are suggesting. So, for instance, when we talk about incorporating stakeholder voices, whether any stakeholder or marginalized stakeholders, we think that one good approach would be applying ethnographic research, because there is a whole thickness into that ethnographic approach, which allows us to identify nuances that are cultural, organizational, relational in these stakeholder engagement activities that can really bring very, very interesting contributions to the field of project management. And there are also another approach, for instance, when we talk about multi-stakeholder engagement for grant challenges, it could be, for instance, studying these stakeholders in a longitudinal way to understand, so what happens if an innovative idea is being created or not. So these are the three first avenues of suggestions for future research that we identified. And now I leave the floor to Francesco, who is going to explain the next third one.
Yeah, so we have two more themes that emerge, which all together with the three that Roya mentioned leads to a reflection on the methods that we use in project management to actually explore, investigate the engagement with stakeholders. So before I'm going to reach that stage, one important theme to be explained and better understanding also is required towards the stakeholder co-creation and future making. So this is a long-term view of the outcome that stakeholder engagement should reach at the end. So the question is how to balance different stakeholder needs and expectations. We always talk about this balance, but really little understanding is behind the practice of balancing different needs. Also, how stakeholders should be dynamic, stakeholder engagement should be dynamic in order to have a process that create value among different interests. This leads back to the linkage between management and purpose. So when we see value co-creation among stakeholders, we see also a long-term view and how managers and projects should look to the future. Yeah, how making the future together with different stakeholders, allowing both organization and players, different players, actors to try together. And this is what actually the lens of sustainability or resilience, for example, is, which looks, of course, to the short term in the beginning, but has a much broader and longer perspective of the future impact that the value should, in the end, be delivered to different stakeholders. So in this case, the future making, which has been recently highly investigated in organization studies, for example, also play a crucial role into the project setting. How stakeholders can co-create together a future that will benefit both the project organization and stakeholders. Also, we need to, in order to understand how a better future or future making the shift from management to purpose actually function, we need first to understand the tension and power dynamics that may arise when trying to balance different needs and try to distribute value among and across stakeholders. One of the methods that we recommend in order to further investigate this very interesting area of research is to have a longitudinal study, which actually shows how solution leads to an outcome and how the outcomes leads to an impact. And impact may be short-term, medium-term, or long-term. And this long-term impact, actually the future making, is actually missing in our knowledge today. So we highly recommend to go back, examine how stakeholders have been engaged, what the outcome have been, and then assess such outcome years after, for example, the completion of the project, to see the real value that has been created. Another important topic that emerged, if we can move to the next slide, is the novel context, of course, in which stakeholders have been investigated. One slide back, please. Yes. So this is, of course, this new novel context and channels for stakeholder engagement emerge due to the new technological approach and development that we are recently facing in project and management studies. The use AI will, of course, have an impact in the way that different stakeholders are engaged. The question is, are they really engaged through the new technological channels, or they are just reached by such technological channels? So is really engagement or reach? And this is something that we need to really consider. Is technology a way to include stakeholders or actually exclude them into the conversation? We need to, in this case, to reflect a little bit more on the benefit and risk and opportunities and risk in apply different channels for stakeholder engagement. How do we apply such channels, and what are the short, medium, and long-term effect of the use of such channels in order to engage stakeholders in a meaningful way? One of the methods that can be explored, of course, is towards big data or real data. Real-time data, for example. Social network analysis, of course, is very established to see how the evolution and the new technology may actually tell us something meaningless or meaningful. Yeah, I always take a kind of not really positive perspective and try to challenge my assumption here that something really good can emerge. So for that reason, I really invite the future authors investigating this linkage between engagement and new technologies to see what really the risk and benefits are among such new way of engaging stakeholders. The 5 teams together leads to the last one, which basically leads to the diverse innovative methodological approaches that we can use. The 6 papers published in this special issue show diverse methodological approach to investigate stakeholder engagement. However, we still, in project management, really conservative in the way that we do research. There are so many other methods that we don't really make full use of. For example, visual data or audio, video data that may be really interesting to explore rather than a simple case study, qualitative or quantitative research, interviews or survey, which are really standard and safe in order to put an article in for submission. So really encourage the future research in this direction to explore, of course, a method that allows to understand a more holistic way of capturing feeling, beliefs, and experience of stakeholders, but also that use different data collection methods, video, audio, that would be really interesting also to explore. So what is the expected contribution here? To uncover the new dimension of stakeholder engagement, which has got a huge potential. So I also highly encourage future and prospective authors to reflect on the methodological gap. If the methods that they are using at the moment is just a safe method, or is a method that really help to answer the research question and capture the real meaning of stakeholder engagement. So I think I have concluded just probably in time, and then we can now move to the authors presenting the papers.
Yes, thank you, Francesco. Now it's time for the paper presentations. We have 3 papers now being presented today. So let's start with the paper of Sergei Florisel and Maud Brunet. So Maud, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Let me share this thing here, and I will just start. Okay. So, thank you for this invitation. I had the pleasure to write a conceptual paper with Sergei Florisel as part of this special issue. So the title is Grandstanding, the Elusive Process of Shaping Megaproject Symbolism. So why did we undertake this study? Well, we wanted to disentangle the processes of shaping the symbolism of megaprojects and see how they might influence stakeholders' engagement. So this is a conceptually dense paper, but yeah, we wanted to kind of tackle this topic. There's still a lot of things to be uncovered. So it was kind of an exploratory conceptual paper. And when we talk about symbolism, we define it as the aura of impressions, namely emotions, meanings, and action propensities emerging around a project in its various representations, which is a result of largely uncontrollable individual and social processes. So what we came with in our paper, if you're interested, you can go and have more of a look. So I won't go into all of these processes, but what we try to do is really to map the shaping of symbolism through a processual approach. So what we distinguish are 2 main aspects. So we have the expressing, the expressing one, and then the impressing one. So what you can see in this figure is that there's a social or collective level and also an individual level. So we didn't go that much into the different levels, and I think this is an interesting research avenue to explore even more. But we did articulate that the first thing is the expressing vehicle. So we have either the abstract, which might be mediated expression, such as language, ideas, or significations. And then at the bottom part, you can see on the left side, the concrete vehicle, which is more direct expression, such as shape, color, texture, or behavior, which is more that you can see. And then we have the mega project representation. So it might be everything that is around the project, the mock-ups, the plans, the financial things, even in the media, what comes out. And then we have the second step, which is an impressing vehicle. So the first above you can see is the affective emphasis. So everything that is visceral, impulsive, attaching, or passionate. And then on the other side, at the bottom part, is everything that is linked to the cognitive side, which is more reflective, practical, calculated, or reasoned. So, which at the end, all these dimensions shape symbolism around mega projects or projects in general. And then hopefully this comes to stakeholder convergence and when we define both alignment and articulation. So again, I won't go too much in detail, but this is what we try to come up with in this paper. So it is a conceptual paper, but we used an illustration, and it is the New Copenhagen Opera Project, Opera House, which has been inaugurated in 2005. So just that you can have a look here at what the building looks like, and we came here and I kind of simplified table 2 from our paper, which present the 4 types of mega projects here. And what you can see in orange are kind of the illustration from the empirical project that I just showed. So what we do here is that we, based on the process that I presented, we articulate 4 different types under expressing side, so whether it's abstract or concrete, and under impressing process, whether it's cognitive or affective. So you can see here, and we define the 4 types, so narrative legitimating, tectonic embedding, iconic agitation, and spectacular appeal. So we also do articulate a proposition for every of those types. And what you can see from the empirical illustration, I won't go into the details of each type, but is that for one project, you can have all types. Okay, so for the opera house, there are characteristics which can be linked to the different types of symbolism. And what does that mean for stakeholder engagement? Because that's the issue, is what we are interested in, is that the managers, and even from a broader perspective, when we are about to do a mega project or a project, it is possible to kind of influence one type or another. So if we want to put more emphasis on the affective side for identitarian symbolism, for example, it is possible to do. So it is not such a thing that we want to. We don't want this to be instrumentalized, but I think that if we are more conscious of those very implicit processes, and we put it more emphasis and explicit actions towards getting more engagement, it is an useful tool to use. So I guess I will stop here, but yeah, this was our intent, and I'm looking forward to the discussion part after this. So thanks.
Thank you very much, Maud. And now to the next paper by Nader Derpashou et al.
Thanks, Kirsi, and sorry, I want to share my screen. All right, Nader Derpashou. I'm head of School of Project Management at the University of Sydney, and I'm presenting a paper that I did with Ali and Stuart, my co-authors. I'm cautious of the time, but I would like to take the opportunity and do what we do in Australia commonly and pay my respect to elders past, present, and emerging from the land that I'm joining, which is land of the Gadigal people of Eora Nation. And I would like to extend this to the traditional owners of the land for other colleagues who are joining online, wherever they are. I think this is especially very important where our guest editors were emphasizing the underrepresented stakeholders in the project. So the context of our study was, if I want to start, traditionally we were bounded on the study of the stakeholders and organizations within one project. Then a new wave of research a few decades ago started to look outside the boundary of projects. And for example, in my previous work, I have looked at social opposition to projects or public perception to projects, or how do we engage communities in the project. But when we look at project ecologies, we are not only bounded also by one project, we have multiple projects. And in these studies, we looked at an understudied interaction between competitors. So we didn't come only outside the boundary of a project, but we also went into the boundary of another project. And the specific context was the project ecologies of construction in the construction industry. And the type of interactions we looked at was the sharing of the resources. It can be human resources, it can be assets, or it can be, for example, royalties. So sometimes they call it collaborative consumption, and different forms of it can be called also sharing economy. So we observed different forms of tensions, especially tensions of competition and cooperation within this, which are very unique to project ecologies, which is coming about the peculiarities of the project and complexities that we have on the projects. And these complexities would differentiate these cooperative mechanisms with, for example, consumer products, the Ubers and Airbnbs, where we are having a very standardized service here. But in project ecologies, because of the focus on project success, the uniqueness that we had, or bounded specialty that we would have on the projects, these would create some unique tensions. But we also observed how do we organize in the face of these complexities. Obviously, we need different forms of regulatory mechanisms in the form of formal organizing, contractually, insurance, but also we need some knowledge brokering, which is done usually through platforms where these information about sharing of resources would be shared between the competitors. But the formal organizing is not all that has been done. There is a whole lot that is done also informally. How do different competitors would shape strategic resource dependence, or how do we assume that the boundaries of organizations are permeable and resources can go not only beyond the boundaries of a permanent organization, but also the temporary organization and project that we would have. And all these organizing would be that we want to shoot higher. We want to have set targets that are higher than what one company or one organization can do individually. So we want to create these collective commitments and joint specializations. And the process that we observed is that this potential will be seen. For example, there are idle resources that we want to use, or we want to have innovative value creation mechanisms. And then the firms go and try to find the different mechanisms of the resource sharing. We will observe these tensions, which are very specific, as mentioned in the context of project ecologies, the tensions of competition and cooperation. And then there are different forms of organizing, a combination of formal and informal organizing to address these tensions. And at the end, we would go for value creation, which is broader than, again, opportunities that we can pursue individually, some mutual and more collective forms of value creation. So this is our paper in a snapshot. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nader. And now over to Ken.
Thank you, Cassie. I'm just going to share my screen, and while I do that, I'll do the same thing that Nader did as well, which is to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land. And I'm currently in the land of Turrup country here in Australia. Hopefully you can all see my screen. And so I just want to also acknowledge my other authors as well. Pernille is actually with us. So Pernille, if there's anything that I say wrong, I'm banking on you to come and jump in and correct me. But also
Sure.
this work has been done together with Anna Lund Jepsen from the University of Southern Denmark, and also Ivy Zhang as well, who's doing a PhD with me at the School of Project Management. And she's actually very successfully just completed and defended her thesis as well. So very proud of that. Okay. So we started with the original question of how do projects actually engage with stakeholders in the online social media space. And when we tackle that question, in traditional stakeholder management work, what typically happens is the process of identifying and then assessing and prioritizing stakeholders. And this draws on the work of Pernell and Anna's work in 2016, where you ask yourself who's affected, or be affected by the project, which is the identification component. And then you ask yourself, to what extent would the stakeholders contribute to project success and what the motivations are as well. And in terms of prioritization, we ask ourselves which particular stakeholder needs the most attention. And on the right column over here, we have a number of practical tools that are used in practice as well as in scholarly work when it comes to stakeholder prioritization and assessment and identification. So when we try to translate this into the online space, when we looked at stakeholders online in social media, what we found was that it was particularly challenging because you don't necessarily know the motivations of different stakeholders. For instance, there are stakeholders who are from news media, there are particular stakeholders from government groups, and then there are residents and so on. And the fact that we cannot confirm each and every person's motivations or the contribution therefore makes it very difficult to assess and therefore prioritize them. It's not that it's not impossible, but it's also quite tedious to actually do the exact same process in the online space as you do it with offline stakeholders. So our question then changed, and the question that we had in this particular research paper was, what adjustments to this entire process of identifying and assessing, what adjustments are needed in that aspect, and therefore what response strategies are advisable if we are to engage the project community stakeholders on social media. And so the context for our study was actually the Western Sydney Airport. Now, this is due to be launched actually next year, 2026, end of next year. And this is the second international airport in Sydney. And when we looked at the case study, we looked at its official page, which is the Western Sydney International Airport. And this is on Facebook. We also looked at other platforms like LinkedIn and X, or formerly Twitter. What we found was that there was a lot more interactions on the Facebook page itself, and also there was a lot more details in terms of their commentary and the sentiment and so on. So we looked at posts from September 2018, which was when this official page was established or launched. And in particular, we looked at topic areas which had the most interactions, and that revolved around the Experience Center. So the Experience Center is actually a physical center where people can come in and view models of the airport and also look at the construction that was going on, the runways and so on. So it was actually a center where you can experience what the airport would be like. And then the other topic was around local employment, because this was also quite political, because a lot of jobs and promises were made about local employment as a result of this mega project. Facebook was the source we chose, and what we did was we looked at different comments. So we picked up things like who was posting, when it was posted, images or videos, and what was the reaction there. And we then looked at the different levels of responses and comments. So this was the data that we collected. And the framework that we used for our analysis, as described in the paper, is there were three components to it. So the first one was assessing, the sentiment, whether the stakeholders and the project were posting responses that were positive or neutral or negative. And then we assessed the level of engagement. This was using Johnston and Taylor's method, looking at different tiers of engagement. If it was really low level, there was just something like hitting a like or something. Mid-level was more, there was more commentary and acknowledgement, showing understanding or trying to connect with one another, whether it's from the stakeholders to the project or vice versa. And higher level ones were where actual actions were undertaken. And for instance, the project saying something like, "Oh, we've taken note of your complaint about the opening hours of the center. We'll take that to our management meeting," and so on. And the third aspect for our analysis was looking at the response strategies. This is very much from your work, Kirsty, and also from Francesco's and also Nguyen's work, where we looked at whether the project, did they respond according to one of these strategies, from adaptation to influence. And the conclusion that we had at the end of it was, just in general, most of the findings we found was that from the project perspective, there was either a lot of avoidance or dismissal, and they would either shift blames of people were asking about flight paths, and while they were experiencing the experience center, the project would easily shift it to the government and the flight path plans, and a lot of commentaries were just dismissed and ignored. So what we found was that if we are to think about stakeholders who are engaging online, and Francesca, I like the point you mentioned, is it reach or engagement? We think that if you do want to engage them, then we have to adjust the strategy. And one of the key push that we're making in this paper is the acknowledge and encourage those kind of positive responses. And so that's kind of always on acknowledgement. That's one strategy we're proposing. And instead of looking at stakeholders online, it would be beneficial to identify issues and then assess those issues rather than the stakeholders themselves. So just in a very short span of time, that's all I wanted to talk about this paper, just highlighting our findings. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ken. And now it's time to move to the actual panel discussion that will be hosted by Francesco.
Okay, so thank you very much for presenting. Really interesting outcome of your research. And the main interactive part is here now, where I'm going to ask you some question, and let's follow the order, okay? Maud first, then Nader, then Ken. You already mentioned some type of motivation behind the paper. I'm really curious, Maud, and this is a question for the three of you, okay? So very briefly, we got only 20 minutes, and then we're gonna leave the space for question and answer. Maud, what has been the problem that really you observed, in practice, that leads you to this conceptual paper? So what motivated the paper? And what the problem that you've observed?
Well, thanks for the answer. I think, and again, the aim was to disentangle this conceptually very dense and very charged concept of symbolism. We wanted to dig more into that because we all probably know the Fluberg paper about the four sublime. We have mega projects and they are very aesthetically engaging or pleasing. There's a political side of it, there's an economic side of it. So we wanted to dig more into what is symbolism and how could we try as promoters or as stakeholders, how can we try to influence the symbolism around the project to engage more stakeholders, to make them more feeling part of the project, feeling that this is a project that will be positively charged for them. So how can we link it more to their identitarian side or affective side or cognitive side? So we wanted really, the problem was that it was just, okay, we have mega projects, they mean something. There there are a lot of symbols around it, but how can we make sense about this? So it was really this conceptual quest maybe, but I think there's a lot of practical and very tangible things that we can do around it once we know, when we know more. So what actions can we do as promoters, but as stakeholders like local citizens? How can they engage and make sure that the projects that will be around them, that they will relate to them, and that it will be positive for their own development? So I will say that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
Sure.
Can you hear me? Yeah, it appeared
Yes.
on the mute note. So thank you very much, Maud, for explaining. Yes, so the symbolism around mega project can be interpreted in a different way. And of course, the way that people make sense or an infrastructure project, for example, which leads to so many different type of symbols, right? It can be political, for example, yeah, political symbolism as a mega project, how affects the practice or thinking to the development and the real purpose of the mega project in say. A really good explanation, a really good paper. I really like it. Nader, it's your turn now. Really briefly, what is the problem that you have seen in practice that is beyond your paper? So what motivated you to write this paper?
Yeah, the main motivation was that in the project ecologies, especially the ones that we studied on construction project, it's a very low profit margin, very high asset dependent, and basically the competition is very vicious, and sometimes just relying on our own assets is not enough. And the rate of bankruptcy, especially in the past few years, for example, in Australia, is very high. But so this is general context that requires some innovative ways of value creation within the projects. But also there was some curiosity of really seeing how this sharing and platform economy would work in the complexity of project ecology.
Very, very good. Yes, extremely important to see how different perspective and ecologies actually are blended and how the stakeholder engagement emerged there in order to make sense of such environment. Ken, it's your turn. Many papers now are just focusing on AI, technology, social media. What really motivated you in practice? Yeah. To write this really interesting work.
Yeah, thanks, Francisco. So from a practical point of view, when we look at, particularly here in Australia, when we look at infrastructure projects, what we find is that engagement is actually usually done because of it's legislated, right? So if you want to do any particular development, what happens is that you're legislated by things like the environmental impact statement, and then as a result of that, you've got to do social impact studies and assessments and so on. And because of this, it almost seems like projects will have to do a tick of the box exercise. Whereas if you want engagement to be meaningful, we also think that you've got to cover a really, you've got to obviously do it quite early on, even during pre-planning phases, and really engage, as you said, multi-stakeholders, marginalized stakeholders, and also in the online space. When we talk to people like social impact managers from the airport side, how is engagement going? They base it off their official meetings with different councils, and they're saying engagement is great. People are really happy. It's skyrocketing, so through the roof. But when you look at the online space, has that been actually addressed? Have those stakeholders there been addressed? And therefore, I think the kind of genesis of this paper.
Yeah, so it's extremely important, and thank you, Ken, for really highlighting what actually we face today in the continuous use of new technology in order to interact, engage, or involve different parts, especially into the business world. Now we have already covered our future direction for research in the stakeholder engagement field based on the outcome of the 6 papers that has been published in this special issue. But I really want to ask your personal opinion, starting with Maud, with one question, and then I'm going to move to Nader with another one, and to you, Ken, for concluding this future endeavors on stakeholder engagement. So Maud, for you, what emerging subject or underexplored areas in stakeholder engagement are, in your view, important to explore? So there are some emerging subjects or underexplored areas that are not really covered in stakeholder engagement. So what do you believe, the research community should focus on?
I really enjoyed your editorial. I referred to it several times already, so I think those research avenues are really well articulated. What I specifically like and would like to see more is how to include marginalized stakeholders more. So how to take account of multiple voices or voices that are not even heard. So this comes also with another stream in project management research, which is maybe a bit more critical, and it's about uncovering power dynamics behind that are not explicit, but are kind of there, and they shape the projects in a certain way. So I like this idea of including stakeholders that are typically not included and to co-construct with them. So I also like all your calls for more longitudinal exploration, ethnographic field work and types of methods like that. So I think we need to be more sensible about who are the stakeholders and how to make the best of the projects that we can using the collective intelligence around it. So.
Thank you very much. Now, Nader, where do you see the major blind spot in current stakeholder engagement research?
I think one of the emerging theme that was discussed in this panel and before, when in the introduction was again also Maud was just referring to, was this underrepresented stakeholders. But I want to look at it from the research methodology perspective, and because a lot of the data that we get, even the more modern ways of data collections of the social media, the challenge is that underrepresented are not presented in the data. We usually don't have access. It's hard to find them, and even when you find them, it's their time is a burden for them. So it's a major blind spot in me is a research methodology of how do we get the data. Don't add a burden to those marginalized data to sit them, for example, to do interview with them, but also be observing and studying what are the challenges that they are facing.
Thank you very much. Ken, how can future research better address the dynamic relationship between those one embedded in the permanent organization?
Yeah, you slightly cut off there, Francesco, but I can...
I'm going to repeat it.
Yes, please. Thank you.
So how can future research better address the dynamic relationship between stakeholders at the project level and those embedded into the permanent organization?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So I'm actually quite a big fan of, this kind of ethnographic studies, for instance, and naturalistic inquiry, which Johan has published in Project Leadership in Society. And I think that the projects at the moment, we are actually not fully exploiting, the power of these kind of social media and as well as even generative AI for understanding and really tapping into the voices of multi-stakeholders and including marginalized stakeholders, and the ones who, may not be present in, official channels like town halls and so on. And so I think with more research coming, I think what we can do is actually almost develop frameworks for listening in to stakeholders, which is quite important, and therefore even develop some kind of stakeholder intelligence framework, which will then allow us to really not just reach out, but really understand how to engage with them better. And particularly if you think about projects, temporary organizations and permanent organizations, I think the one work we can do a lot better is the how-to of engagement. And I think that's also one aspect that's quite lacking. I'll also just tap on Pernell's shoulder to see if she wants to add anything. After all, she is a co-author, if you don't mind, Francesco, just in case.
Absolutely.
Right? Pernell,
thank you
if
so
you want to
much.
add anything,
Ken. I really like to add to this, that I really believe in this stakeholder intelligence framework thinking. But to add more, I also think we could investigate the who question, who is actually doing the stakeholder engagement, because in this research we did, where we were looking at the social media, we didn't figure out who are actually representing the project. We could figure out it was probably not the project manager, him or herself. And if it's somebody else, I think this is really underdeveloped in our understanding who are going to do the stakeholder engagement. And I think this could be investigated both empirically but also theoretically. So I would add that to what you said, Ken.
Thanks,
It's
Pernell.
really interesting. Thank you so much. So if I can add something, it's really interesting how the stakeholder in theory is moving very, very fast, right? So we start towards a very instrumental approach, which the organization have seen the stakeholder as basically a mean to achieve their own objective. Then in the last, since Freeman work, we have seen a shift towards a more normative approach. And now towards new rule and regulation. So project organizations are actually forced to do engagement. And I'm really sure that in the future, we are going to have much more intense and engagement with stakeholders as we used to. For that reason, one of the interesting future research may also be the dark side of over-engagement. So what are the negative consequences of having a more extensive engagement with stakeholders? This is in terms of, for example, cost or time for approval, something that we are facing in UK. So the DCO, the Development Consent Order, is basically needs to be in place for any major infrastructure project to be approved. This requires extensive involvement and engagement with the local communities. This DCO, in order to be approved, sometimes requires years, many years, 6, 7 years, 8 years, only to get a project approved. And so what are the missed opportunity there? Delivering a project probably not when it's really needed, but many years after, because the consultation process. Is this the price of democracy? Is this the price of innovation? And something that I'm really supportive of. But what is the dark side and the consequences of over-engagement? And this is actually the emerging of the new stakeholder theory, right? So what leads also to the value co-creation discourse, what is given and what actually is receiving from different parties playing a role in society and project. Very quickly to the next follow-up question. Maud, I wanted to hear from you what you believe about methods Okay, so we have shown methodological diversity. Which methods you already mentioned, like ethnographic approach, may be really interesting, but what will be in the future, yeah, from your point of view, the most promising for stakeholder research? Sometimes as a scholar, we don't have enough time to do ethnography research. Would be beautiful, but will slow down our publishing pipeline, even though it will be ideal. Do you think that will be feasible?
I just want to say also, I agree with Nader. Huh? Access is not always easy. Those people involved voluntarily in local organizations fighting against a project, for example, they do that on top of their current workload and everything that is to do with their personal lives and children and stuff like that. So it's very difficult to get to them. I guess the suggestion of using social media might be also something interesting, but ethnographic work requires time, of course, but I think it's us as researchers. I think one way is to build relationships with local organizations, with volunteers, to be there at some critical points, maybe not like an ethnographic study or where we are there all the time, but it's really to kind of create relationships with the people that can get us to see where they are, how they organize, how they do support or try to fight a project, for instance. So it's not easy, but it's what locally we're trying to do, to really look at who's involved around a project. Sometimes it's for, sometimes it's against, but I think we as researchers have to be creating those real relationships with stakeholders that we are not typically dealing with as researchers. So.
Absolutely agree with you, Maud. Thank you so much. Nader, do you see a shift towards more interdisciplinary approaches in researching stakeholder engagement? If so, which fields are influencing this evolution?
I believe in plurality of the approaches. So we should learn from every discipline that is possible and how we can cross fertilize across disciplines. I just give two examples from my previous works. When I was publishing mostly on engineering, we use simulations, and that was also to look at the power relations between different stakeholders in modeling social opposition to infrastructure projects. We published recently in also crisis management type of project, and in that we published a research methodology paper recently on trauma-informed way of research, which would be very useful for stakeholder management. Again, the challenges that Maud was bringing up and Ken was also highlighting, and there are different principles of how to conduct trauma-informed research, but one of the most basic in research design for us was that while we had a postdoc in the university, we had 3 research assistants who were from the communities, so they knew the context. So the postdoc here would have an unbiased view, and the people in the communities would have more trauma-informed approach of approaching the interviewees.
Thank you so much, Nader. Really interesting. Last question, Ken, we have a couple of minutes. We draw a clear distinction between stakeholder management and engagement. What does this shift mean for research in practical terms, also for the project organization?
Yeah, thanks, Francesco. I think, traditionally when we looked at stakeholder management, and this is also from general management in that field, they focused a lot on the analysis, the identity and so on, and therefore Martina and Penel, they spoke at length about not just the management of stakeholders, but for stakeholders, and there's more shift now towards engagement. And I think that's kind of almost moving towards, maybe partnership, for instance. If we are thinking about marginalized communities, if we are thinking about multi-stakeholders, if we are thinking about community stakeholders, as equally important, right? I think that listening aspect is really important. To give you a brief example, in some of the work we did with the Department of Planning, Industry and Environment here in New South Wales, Australia, whereas they used to just determine planning zones, residential or commercial, sort of dictate and so be it. They've had a shift in their entire department where they focus so much on the importance of listening to communities even before they do any kind of zoning or planning. And therefore, they have things like, they call it the local character statements of a particular suburb. And that really tells you what that identity is of that particular, community there. And therefore, what's to touch, what's not to touch. They want to retain a village vibe and so on. So I think people are getting it, and social media is ever becoming a tool where, even disconnected communities can have a voice now, so much so that it can disrupt projects, as we all know. And so it's getting to a point where I think this is going to be really huge, stakeholder engagement. And now with technologies like AI and definitely with social media, I think there's a lot more research that needs to be done. And you've captured it so well, Francesco, in your call to future research. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ken. I think we have reached at the end of this panel. Christine, open for any question and answer, right?
Yeah, I think first of all, a really big thank you to all of you. It was, I think, and I hope I speak for our audience as well, it was a fascinating overview and really interesting, and the panel discussion really enriched also the insights into the paper and the thinking behind and the motivations of the authors for researching why you are doing what you're doing. So yeah, thank you all very much. We've had a few questions. The first one is for the editors. And there is the question on if the editors would consider future contributions that reframe stakeholder engagement not as a fixed dyadic relationship, but as a more emergent relationship through a socio-material practice perspective. The question is much longer. I'm not going to read it all out, but I think, the essence of the question is, are you open, or would you be open in the future to other perspectives to reframe kind of the dyadic relationship of stakeholder engagement? Don't know who would like to take that.
Yeah, very much.
Yes.
Very much. Yeah, I very much support this idea, and the idea of kind of reframing stakeholder engagement as an emergent socio-material practice. And I think that this perspective nicely emphasizes the kind of the situated nature of engagement, and in a way shifting the focus, I think, to kind of the understanding how stakeholders and the roles and relationships are enacted and also evolving over time. And as we were welcoming these kind of multidisciplinary approaches also in our editorial, so I really much support this idea.
Excellent. Thank you, Kirsty. And then we have a question for Ken. Again, it's a very long one. I'm not going to read everything out, but the focus of the question is, clearly a research methodology is required to reveal how stakeholder identities evolve in practice. Ideally near real time, including moments of unanticipated emergence or disruption. But with algorithmic bias detection if the primary source of data is online digital data. Do you or would you agree? Can we discuss? I think you might take the bigger discussion offline, but maybe a quick answer on your thoughts on this question or statement.
Yeah, I think any sort of project delivery or program or directors and so on, they would be thrilled to have any kind of dashboard that's, for instance, harnessing all the data from all sorts of social media about particular projects and having, a traffic light signal showing you sentiment and so on. And you can basically pinpoint to see where the hotspots are, or where, if you put in social network analytics to it, be able to tell where groups are mobilizing, where factions are forming. Wouldn't that be great? And I think that's that's very interesting. I think that is where Dennis is going with the question. And yeah, I think it's we're all working towards projects that can really add value to various stakeholders and so on. So potentially in future perhaps, but I agree that yeah, this is a discussion that can definitely happen. I'm very much also in favor of those sorts of dashboards. So yes, Dennis, would love to discuss further.
Excellent, thank you, Ken.
Mm.
And then we have a discussion related to inclusive and ethical engagement, or a question. So the question is, in stakeholder engagement, we often assume that all stakeholders want to be consulted, but in practice, some actively disengage. What might be the underlying reasons for this? And how should the project managers or the researchers respond to make sure that there is inclusive and ethical engagement? I can see Kirsty has unmuted herself. So Kirsty, or are you still unmuted?
Yeah, I can also, and
this question?
Yeah, I can, and of course, Roya, for example, if you want to complement. So I think this is a really crucial observation, and many times I think that the reasons for stakeholder disengagement are many times overlooked, and one kind of concept that I was also picking up from the panel discussion was the meaningfulness and meaningful. The perspective of meaning as a key concept. So I was thinking that it may also relate to this, that we need to make the engagement meaningful for the stakeholders. And obviously there might be various reasons for why they are disengaging, like their past experiences, or their kind of engagement fatigue, or they may not be seeing some kind of meaningful outcomes from the engagement efforts. So I think that making and trying to shape the engagement so that it's meaningful for the stakeholders, and as we were discussing or you were discussing in the panel, of course, the key is to listen and kind of the stakeholders and show empathy. So Roya, yeah, I think you might have some perspectives.
No, I just wanted
on
to say that this is an interesting question that we still don't have the answer to. So what we might even say is based on our understanding from what we know from the organization side. We don't know that much from stakeholder side why do disengage, but however, very limited studies and broader management and organization studies had shown that this is mainly because, as you mentioned, stakeholders realize that they actually are not finding their own interest or meaning in what is happening in the organization, or in this case in the project. But this is completely open to all the discoveries out there, because again, we don't know a lot about what happens that the stakeholders get disengaged. So I am a little bit skeptical about whether all stakeholders want to be consulted or not. I would assume that by definition, the stakeholders are those who have a sort of interest in the project. So by definition, they would have been like to be consulted and engaged, but how this engagement is happening and whether it is what they know, what they are looking for into this engagement or not, this is another question.
Thank you.
Yeah, very briefly, it's a really interesting question, because the majority of stakeholders are silent, right? So they don't have the tool, or they don't have the will to engage. And this is something that we need to study more, as Roya and rightly, who made the question on the chat? Roxana rightly said, and also Kirsty. So the reason for stakeholder disengagement is not known, but it's very contextual. Really, if we talk about project dependent as well. So unless something really touch you very closely, you are not likely to react. And the majority people is like that. If you don't feel you are not tended to react. And this is why probably they are not really willing to engage, and they say, well, even communication from the project organization, I don't really care to open a letter and read what is going to happen to me. But yeah, so the reason for this engagement really interested, but we should know that the majority is silent.
Thank you very much. I think that answered most of the questions. We had one last one, which relates to who's paying for all the researchers. I think that's beyond the scope of what we can discuss here. So I am just putting the link to the special collection on IJPM into the chat. That's the link which takes you to the editorial where the future directions for research are outlined, which you've heard earlier in the webinar, but also to all the papers that were part of the special collection, including the 3 that were presented today. So I think from my side, a big thank you to the guest editors and to the authors for making this such an interesting and an engaging webinar, for taking the time to share your work with us. Thank you so much. And hopefully we see you in one of the following webinars, which we are currently organizing. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, and thanks, Christine.
Thanks, Christine.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks,
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Thank you
everyone.
for attending. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.